Member for Menzies.
Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, I move that this House, 1, notes that there are around 8 million Coptic Christians living in Egypt, that freedom of religion is a universal human right, that Egypt is obliged under international law to ensure the protection of racial and religious groups and individuals, and that Coptic Christians in Egypt continue to suffer religious persecution and discrimination, and 2, calls upon the Egyptian government to guarantee that Coptic Christians and members of other religious communities and minorities enjoy the full range of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, it's estimated that around 15% of Egypt's 80 million people are Christians. According to tradition, Christianity was introduced by St Mark to Alexandria, making it one of the oldest Christian communities in the world and indeed the oldest in Africa. Originally a reference to Egyptians generally, the term Copt, deriving from the word Aegyptos, is now used to describe Egyptian Christians. After the Arab invasion of Egypt in the 7th century, Copts became a minority, but they remained a significant and prosperous group. They remained indeed an important group working with Muslims towards the freedom and the independence of Egypt early in the early part of last century. And indeed, the organisation, the Washington Institute of Near East Policy, has noted, and I quote, "Christians work side by side with Muslims in the creation of modern Egypt. In the 1919 uprising against British occupation, Coptic priests were preaching in mosques, including the prestigious mosque in Cairo, and imams were preaching in churches as a symbol of national unity. This trend continued until the 1950s. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, however, during Nasser's pan-Arab socialist regime, the Copts were targeted because of their wealth and reduced to second-class citizens. Many have emigrated, including a relatively small but significant number to Australia. During the past 3 decades of the rule of Hosni Mubarak, the discrimination against the Copts has increased. They are regularly targeted for discrimination and have been subject to increasing violence from Islamist jihadi radicals. One such case occurred when 6 Christians and an off-duty police officer were massacred as they were leaving a Christmas service in January of this year. And this follows a series of other incidents in which hundreds of Copts, unfortunately and tragically, have been killed over the last 20 years. Despite constitutional guarantees of religious freedom, Copts face discrimination and persecution. In practice, it is virtually impossible to build or repair their churches. It can be very difficult to obtain travel documentation, and converts to Christianity are unable to alter their ID cards, although no such obstacle stands in the way of converts to Islam. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, this is not a motion against Islam. It is a motion calling for religious freedom. Egypt is not alone in restricting freedoms, including religious freedom. The persecution of religious minorities, including Christians, Jews, Baha'is and Sunni Muslims in Iran, is an egregious example of such persecution. The restrictions on Christian churches in China is another. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, Egypt has an opportunity to show leadership. It can be a force for toleration and moderation in the Middle East. It can embrace its obligations under international conventions and laws. This would be welcomed by Copts in Egypt, as it would be welcomed by some 70,000 Copts who have made Australia home, but remain concerned about the plight of family and friends and associates who remain in Egypt. I join with members of the Coptic community in Melbourne and Sydney and elsewhere on calling on the government to voice its concerns about this matter and to restore the special immigration assistance to Copts that existed under the previous government.